Her name was Audrey Vale, 34 years old, and that night she understood that her family did not simply want her present at her sister's engagement party. They wanted to turn her into the biggest gift on the stage. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder in front of the living room mirror, smiled like a man granting a favor, and said, "Tonight, all you need to do is stand still, smile, and let Brielle have the beginning she deserves." Audrey looked at him through the reflection in the glass. Malcolm Vale was still wearing a flawless navy suit, his gold watch glinting beneath his cuff, his face calm with the confidence of a man used to entering a room and having people make way for him. He did not ask whether Audrey agreed. In the Vale household, when Malcolm spoke about family, it was usually an order wrapped in velvet. Elise, her mother, was standing near the window, adjusting the string of pearls at her throat. She heard everything, but only smiled. It was the kind of smile that had followed Audrey through childhood, soft enough for outsiders to mistake it for love, but sharp enough to cut off any resistance. Elise always knew how to make people feel guilty before they had a chance to say no. Brielle came down the stairs right after that, her ivory dress falling lightly around her body, her blonde hair spilling over her shoulders, her eyes shimmering as if she had practiced them in the mirror. Audrey's 28-year-old younger sister always appeared like a creature born to be protected. One sigh from Brielle could make their mother abandon a meeting. One tear from Brielle could make Malcolm change an entire weekend plan. Audrey was different. Since childhood, she had been given the role of the person who did not need anyone to hold her up. When Brielle was afraid of the dark, Elise sat beside her bed and read stories until late at night. When Audrey stayed awake under the pressure of scholarship exams, her mother only said, "You are used to handling things on your own." When Brielle failed at a piano recital, the whole family took her out to dinner to comfort her. When Audrey earned her first internship in New York, Malcolm only glanced at the email and said, "Good, but do not let work make you cold." Cold. That was the word they used whenever Audrey's independence made her harder to control. Years later, Audrey became the strategy director of an art investment fund in San Francisco. She managed collections that outsiders could only view through glass, negotiated contracts valuable enough to save an entire company from collapse, and signed documents that men like her father often waited months to have reviewed. But at family parties, Elise still introduced her with one pale sentence, "Audrey works with some investment paperwork." Brielle did not need achievements. She only had to smile. The Vale family loved image more than truth. They loved brightened photographs, champagne glasses lifted at the right angle, compliments spoken in front of guests. Malcolm needed reputation to keep investors close. Elise needed perfection to hide the cracks. Brielle needed to be seen as the girl who deserved every good thing. And Audrey, though they never said it aloud, was the quiet pillar holding that polished house from falling apart. She had once paid her father's overdue taxes when a coastal project was audited. She had once transferred money to her mother to save a charity fundraiser from being canceled because the budget had run short. She had once helped Brielle pay media fees when her sister wanted to build her personal brand but could not afford the filming team. Not once did they call it being rescued. They called it family. Only Aunt Margot had ever called it by its real name. "Do not let them turn you into their backup asset," Margot had once told Audrey inside the glass house by the Carmel coast. Sea wind moved through the thin curtains, sunlight breaking into pieces across the wooden floor. Aunt Margot was the woman the entire Vale family called eccentric because she never married, never asked permission, and never lowered her voice to make the men in the family comfortable. But to Audrey, she was the only person who saw her not as a wallet, not as a solution, but as a human being. After Margot died, the glass house became a silence inside the family. No one mentioned it for long. No one asked Audrey how she felt. Malcolm only said the property needed to be managed wisely. Elise said a beautiful house should not be left empty. Brielle once looked at a photo of the house on her phone and whispered, "That place looks like it was made for a new beginning." Tonight, inside the villa prepared for Brielle and Adrian's engagement party, those words returned to Audrey's mind like the sound of a glass cracking. Adrian Cole stood outside in the courtyard, smiling at guests, but his hand kept checking his phone. Audrey knew that kind of anxiety. It was not nervousness from happiness. It was the fear of someone waiting for a rescue payment to arrive on time. Malcolm approached his oldest daughter again. He lowered his voice, but his eyes still held their familiar command. "Brielle needs you tonight," he said. "Do not make things complicated." Audrey looked at her father, then at her mother, then at her sister, glowing beneath the chandelier like the main character of a story that had already been written. For the first time, she did not feel pain right away. She only felt awake, because beneath the surface of an underestimated daughter, Audrey was holding something the entire Vale family had never fully understood. Control of the trust. A silence that knew how to remember. And the legacy of the aunt who had seen this storm before it ever had the chance to call itself family love. The engagement party began before the sun had fully set, but Audrey could already feel darkness arriving ahead of the night. The seaside villa in Carmel had been covered in a beauty that was almost too perfect. White flowers lined the entrance. Glass candles stood in neat rows along the long tables. A string quartet played melodies as soft as silk. Elise had arranged everything so that at first glance, people would see love, and if they looked longer, they would see power. Audrey walked across the stone courtyard, her black dress fitting her figure cleanly, so simple it almost challenged the entire room full of diamonds and expensive silk. She had not come to stand out. But that night, her calmness made more than a few people turn their heads. Elise noticed it first. She was adjusting the flowers on the reception table when her hand paused for the briefest moment. Malcolm saw it too. His eyes slid over Audrey, then stopped on the gray pearl necklace she was wearing, the only piece Aunt Margot had left to her before she died. He did not like that. Brielle stood in the middle of the garden like a painting lit from the perfect angle. An ivory dress, softly curled hair, a trembling smile just fragile enough to make people want to protect her. Adrian stood beside her, one hand behind his back, his thumb constantly rubbing the edge of his phone. He smiled at guests and shook hands with Malcolm's investors, but his eyes kept flicking toward the small stage set up beside the pool. Audrey could see the waiting in his posture clearly. It was not the waiting of a happy groom, it was the waiting of a man watching for an emergency exit to open. The more Audrey looked, the more she understood that this was not simply an engagement party. There was a lifestyle reporter in the garden. There was Brielle's private filming team. There were investors Malcolm had mentioned more than once at dinner, always with anxiety hidden behind a glass of wine. There was even someone from the bank standing near the champagne bar, pretending to talk about the weather while his eyes observed everything as if he were valuing a house that had not yet been listed for sale. The Glasshouse was not there, but its shadow covered every glass, every smile, every congratulation. Audrey stepped into a side hallway to avoid the crowd. It was cooler there, quieter, with only the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of waves. As she passed the large painting near the library, a man was suddenly standing there. He wore a charcoal gray suit, his hair already touched with silver, a glass of water in his hand that he had not brought to his lips. He did not look like a guest. He was not trying to blend into the crowd. He was not trying to draw attention. He stood like a man who already knew the ending of the story before it began. "Miss Vale," he said. Audrey stopped. He knew her name. "Tonight, if anyone asks you to confirm anything in front of the guests, do not say yes." His voice was low, even not dramatic at all. That was exactly what made the sentence colder. Audrey looked at him, trying to remember where she had seen him before. He only inclined his head slightly. "Aunt Margot chose people very carefully," he continued, "and she did not choose wrong." Before Audrey could ask him anything, a server passed between them with a tray of drinks. She was blocked for only a second. When she looked again, the man had already walked toward the glass door at the end of the hallway. Her phone vibrated immediately after. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "They will use applause to take what belongs to you." Audrey stood still. The words did not scream, but they struck straight into her chest. She turned her head toward the garden. Malcolm was laughing loudly with two men in dark suits. Elise had her arm linked with Brielle's and was saying something that made her younger daughter lower her head as if moved. Adrian was on the phone, his face turned toward the sea, his shoulders tight as pulled wire. Audrey slipped the phone into her bag. Instead of stepping back outside, she went deeper into the hallway. The door to the study was not fully closed. Through the narrow gap, Malcolm's voice came through, low and certain. "When I make the toast, I will say it is Audrey's gift to both of you. The whole garden will applaud. She will not be able to refuse." Elise answered in a voice as soft as cream spread over a knife. The girl has always been afraid of embarrassing the family. In front of this many people, she will understand what she is supposed to do. Brielle spoke next, quieter. "What if she gets angry?" Adrian answered before anyone else could. "We do not need the transfer right away. We only need the public statement. After that, the lawyers can work out usage rights. The bank only needs to see a basis for restructuring the loan." Audrey's throat went dry. So this was it. Not a request. Not a family surprise. Not a symbol of love on an engagement day. They had prepared to turn her into a witness to her own theft. Elise continued, "Audrey does not need that house. It is too large for someone who only knows how to work. Brielle needs a place to begin her life. She deserves it." Audrey stepped back from the door. No sound, no tears, not one unnecessary breath. In that moment, something inside her closed. Not her heart. Her heart had learned how to endure long ago. What closed was the final door where she had once believed her family might still love her in some clumsy way. She returned to the guest room upstairs. Below, laughter continued to rise with the music. On the vanity table, her phone lit up with an email from Aunt Margot's estate management office. Audrey opened it with very calm fingers. Inside the email was an addendum to the trust, one she had delayed reading for months because every time she saw Margot's name, grief returned like cold wind. But tonight, each line on the screen was no longer sorrow, it was a weapon. The Glasshouse could not be sold, gifted, mortgaged, transferred for long-term use, or used as financial collateral without Audrey's voluntary signature before a foundation representative. Any public act of coercion intended to change control rights would automatically activate Audrey's full protective authority and place the property under a legal lock. At the bottom of the email was a name, Elias Mercer. Audrey immediately understood who the man in the hallway was. He was not a guest. He was the gatekeeper Aunt Margot had left behind. She forwarded the entire email to her private lawyer, along with a single line, "Be present when my father makes his toast." Then, Audrey set the phone down, stood before the mirror, and touched Margot's necklace. Beneath that calm face, the storm had awakened. But this time, it would not destroy her. It would destroy the lie. The sound of a spoon touching a glass rang through the garden like a thin but cold cut. Every conversation slowed, then went silent. The string quartet lowered its volume. All eyes turned toward the small stage, where Malcolm Vale stood beneath an arch of white flowers, microphone in hand, his face lit by the confidence of a man used to being trusted before he ever had to tell the truth. Audrey sat at the table to the left of the pool, where she could see the entire garden. Brielle stood beside Adrian, her hands resting in front of her dress, her eyes shimmering as if she had already prepared herself for the most emotional moment of her life. Elise stood behind her youngest daughter, one hand on Brielle's shoulder, her smile so gentle it almost looked holy. But Audrey saw her mother's fingers tightening slightly. Elise was not emotional. She was in control. Malcolm raised his glass. "Family," he said, "is where we learn to give before we keep things for ourselves." A few guests smiled. Someone nodded. Lines like that always worked well at expensive parties. They sounded noble. Broad enough for everyone to applaud, vague enough to hide something wrong. Audrey placed her hand on Aunt Margot's necklace. The gray pearl felt cool beneath her fingertips. At the last table, Elias Mercer sat still, his untouched glass of water in front of him. He was not looking at Malcolm. He was looking at Audrey, as if reminding her that real power did not need to hurry. Malcolm continued, his voice warming. "Tonight, we are not only celebrating Brielle and Adrian's love, we are also celebrating a special gift, a symbol of sisterhood, sacrifice, and family trust." Adrian lowered his head to hide a smile. Brielle lifted her hand to her mouth. Elise tilted her face slightly toward the camera, catching the most flattering angle of light. Then Malcolm said the sentence they had prepared. My eldest daughter, Audrey, has decided to give the Glasshouse to Brielle and Adrian as her engagement gift. Applause erupted at once. It fell over the garden like hail. People clapped before they understood. They smiled before they asked. A few guests gasped in surprise. Brielle's camera crew immediately turned toward Audrey. The lifestyle reporter standing near the flower table lifted her phone. Malcolm's investors exchanged glances, satisfaction appearing quickly before disappearing behind polite smiles. In that moment, Audrey understood how perfectly cruel their plan was. If she stood up and objected, she would become the sister who ruined the engagement party. If she stayed silent, her silence would be treated as agreement. If she cried, her tears would be edited into gratitude. Malcolm turned toward her, his voice sweet as honey resting on a blade. "Audrey, come up here and say a few words to your sister." The whole garden looked at her. Audrey stood, not rushed, not trembling, not smiling. The applause thinned. Brielle blinked. Elise sensed something slipping away from the script, and her smile hardened. Malcolm still held the microphone, but his hand began to tighten around the metal stem. Audrey asked, her voice not loud but clear enough. "You want me to confirm that I am voluntarily giving the Glasshouse to Brielle, correct?" Malcolm froze for one very brief beat. To outsiders, it was only a pause. To Audrey, it was the first crack. He laughed. "Of course it is voluntary. This is family." Before Audrey could answer, a chair at the last table scraped lightly across the stone floor. Elias Mercer stood. He did not need a microphone, but his voice carried through the garden, sharp and even like a blade wiped clean. "No. This is asset coercion disguised as family love." The air broke apart. Malcolm spun around. Elise went white. Brielle lowered her hand from her mouth. Adrian stepped back half a pace, too small for the guests to notice, but enough for Audrey to see that he was calculating an escape. Elias stepped forward. He took a thin file from inside his jacket and placed it on a table near the stage. "I am Elias Mercer, supervisor of Margot Vale's trust and representative of the Mercer Arts Foundation. The Glasshouse is not under the decision-making authority of Malcolm Vale, Elise Vale, Brielle Vale, or Adrian Cole. This asset is protected by an anti-coercion clause. Audrey Vale is the first legal guardian." Whispers spread like fire, catching thin curtains. Malcolm forced a laugh. "This is a misunderstanding, just a family matter." Elias looked directly at him. "A family matter does not require a secret valuation company. A family matter does not require a bank to review property that has not been transferred. A family matter does not require a false announcement in front of guests to force a woman into silence." Adrian turned pale. One of Malcolm's investors stood, his voice dry. "Malcolm, did you include the Glasshouse in the collateral documents for the Carmel North project?" Malcolm did not answer. That silence was worse than a confession. Elise stepped forward, her voice shaking but still trying to stay soft. "Everyone is misunderstanding this. Audrey, say something. You know we only wanted what was best for Brielle." Audrey looked at her mother. Elise was still trying to pull her into the old net, a net woven from guilt, image, and size. This time, Audrey did not step into it. "I will say something," she replied. Elias handed her the microphone. Audrey took it. The garden became so quiet that the waves striking the cliffs beneath the villa could be heard. "My father just announced a gift I never agreed to give. My mother knew that. Brielle knew that. Adrian needs this property to save his loans. And they thought that if there were enough guests, enough cameras, and enough applause, I would not dare to say no." Brielle burst into tears. "You are ruining my day." Audrey turned to her sister. "No, Brielle. You used your day to take a part of my life." That sentence left the entire garden dead silent. Malcolm grabbed for the microphone, but Elias took one step forward, placing himself between Malcolm and Audrey. No touch was needed. One look was enough to make Malcolm stop. Audrey placed the file on the table. "The Glasshouse will not be gifted, sold, mortgaged, or used in any loan. Starting tonight, full protective authority is activated. If my name or Aunt Margot's property appears in any financial document again, my lawyer will send notice within 24 hours. No one applauded. This time, Silence was no longer their weapon, it was evidence of their failure. Audrey set the microphone down. She walked past Malcolm, past Elise, past Brielle crying in her ivory dress. No one called her back. No one dared. Behind her, phones were still recording. Investors began leaving their tables. The reporter was writing quickly. Adrian stood frozen, like a man who had just watched his life raft sink in front of him. And in the middle of the garden that had been built to turn Audrey into a sacrifice, the truth stood up in her place, brighter than every candle, colder than every blessing. The next morning, the seaside garden no longer looked like a place that had just hosted an engagement party. The white flowers were still there, slightly wilted beneath a thin layer of mist. The candles had gone out, champagne glasses lay tipped over on the tablecloths, and a few chairs had been pulled out of place as if the guests had left in a hurry. The villa was still beautiful, but that beauty could no longer hide the smell of a truth that had just been dragged into the light. The live stream spread before the Vale family had time to put it out. People clipped the moment Malcolm announced a gift that did not exist. They replayed the scene of Elias Mercer standing up, his voice calm like a verdict. They shared Brielle's pale face, Elise's trembling hands, and Audrey's words as she looked straight at her sister. "You used your day to take a part of my life." By noon, Malcolm's phone was almost constantly ringing. Investors demanded an explanation. A bank paused a credit file. A partner in the Carmel North project sent notice that the entire agreement was under review. The people who had once raised glasses to congratulate him now stayed silent or avoided his calls. Malcolm had lived on reputation for too long, and now that very reputation had turned back to choke him. Elise tried to save whatever was left. She posted a short explanation, saying the family had been misunderstood, that everything had only been an emotional moment taken the wrong way. But the comments came faster than she expected. People no longer saw a gentle mother. They saw a woman who had stood still while her daughter was pressured to give away her property. Elise deleted the post in less than an hour, but screenshots were already everywhere. Brielle locked her personal account that afternoon. A fashion brand canceled her contract. 2 cosmetic labels paused their campaigns. The people who had once called her the muse of elegance began asking why that muse had stayed silent while her sister was being deceived in front of the entire garden. Adrian did not comfort her the way she imagined he would. He only kept asking whether Audrey had any way to change her decision. For the first time, Brielle understood that his love also had conditions. And that condition was not her. It was the Glasshouse. Audrey posted nothing. She answered no interviews. She explained nothing to strangers. She let the truth stand on its own. She was too tired of having to prove her pain to people who only believed it when there was a camera. 3 days later, she drove to the Glasshouse alone. The road down to Carmel curved around the cliffs, the sea opening beneath her like an enormous blue-gray mirror. The Glasshouse appeared in the pale sunlight, transparent, quiet, as if it had been waiting for her for a very long time. Audrey stepped inside and heard the key turn in the lock, small but certain. No one was there to tell her to give way. No one reminded her about family. No one turned her silence into agreement. Inside, everything still carried Aunt Margot's breath, the smell of old wood, the scent of oil paint, the dry lavender hanging near the window. Light fell through the glass walls, breaking into pieces across the floor and touching the paintings covered in white cloth. Audrey walked through the living room, past the bookshelves, then stopped at her aunt's desk. In the last drawer, she found an envelope with her name written on it. Audrey opened it with slow hands. "My dear Audrey, if one day your family makes you believe that keeping what belongs to you is selfish, remember this. It is not family love if it only exists when you give something away. The Glasshouse is not a reward. It is a place where you can stand straight without asking anyone for permission." Audrey sat down in the chair by the window. "This time," she cried. Not much. Not loudly. Tears slipped down like things held back for too long, finally finding a way out. She did not cry because she had lost her family. She cried because after all those years, someone had seen her before she had to save herself. 1 week later, Elias Mercer invited Audrey to join the board of the Mercer Arts Foundation. He proposed turning the Glasshouse into a space that supported female artists who had been controlled by family, marriage, or money. Audrey agreed. Not to take revenge on Malcolm, not to prove anything to Elise. She agreed because for the first time, her property was no longer something being targeted. It became a place that protected others. The Vale family still existed, but Audrey no longer lived as their silent support beam. Malcolm could no longer use her name to polish his files. Elise could no longer use tears to pull her back. Brielle could no longer call her sister when she needed rescue money and then pretend she did not know Audrey was hurting. If you have ever been called selfish, just for wanting to keep what belongs to you, leave a comment. Where are you listening from, and have you ever had to stand alone in front of the people who called themselves your family? If Audrey's story reminds you of a hidden family truth, a toxic relationship, or a moment when you had to choose yourself again, like, subscribe, and come back for the next story.